Hi everyone, can you hear me? I don't know if I'm using my headset. Can you guys confirm that you hear me? Okay. Let me just try to see if the microphone is correct. Is it better now? Can you hear me better now with less echo?
Yes.
Okay, probably the echo is because we are in a different room, as you probably can see on the background. Good morning for you, good afternoon for all the people here in Natal. Professor Azevedo won't be able to be present today, so I will serve as a host for this extra seminar. Today we have Professor Ricardo Oliveira presenting the seminar entitled Impact of Physical Activity and Cardiovascular Risk on Vascular Health, Population, Physiology and Perspective. Professor Oliveira is an adjunct professor here at UFRN. So, Professor Ricardo.
All right, thank you guys, thank you Daniel for the introduction. Also, I'd like to thank you Daniel for squeezing me into this seminar. I'm very happy you've been part of this. This is a massive opportunity for our students here at the UFRN, and I do appreciate the invitation and for squeezing me in. So first of all, can you guys hear me well from Virginia?
Yes, very loud.
All right, thank you. So today what I'm going to
I will share the slide, just a second.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, I see. So I'm staring at the camera. Good job. Felipe, você tem clicker?
Tem embaixo, né? Você tem clicker?
Como fala isso? Com laser já está aí. Don't worry, loads of small problems today.
That's great, we can see it.
Yeah, I'm trying to share the slides, but the Zoom window is not allowing me to do that for some reason.
Teu PC me aparecendo aqui?
Can you continue like this? Can you see the slide like relatively clear? I will share as soon as I can hear.
Yeah, I think this is great for me. I don't know about you.
Okay.
All right. Yep. Shall we? Okay. So thank you, Daniel. Thank you, everybody. Thank you guys from Virginia as well for this extra session. I do appreciate. So what I've prepared for today is a bit of my research that I've conducted in different places. A bit of what I'm going to be showing today is work that I conducted in Exeter with colleagues at the University of Exeter, and a lot of what I'll be talking today as well is from the work I completed here in Brazil, in South Brazil, in Pelotas. So yeah, Daniel, can you pass the slides please, because I don't have the clicker. So yeah, so what I've prepared for today is I'll be talking about the development of cardiovascular diseases and how the cardiovascular disease risk factors they influence the development of the procedures of atherosclerosis. And then I'll be talking about vascular health and how the vascular health and how the vessel is the target of the cardiovascular disease and how this, thank you Daniel, and how the cardiovascular disease progress over time Then I'll be talking about a bit of physical activity and how physical activity and exercise can serve as a preventative strategy. And then I'll move on to speak about acute and chronic mechanisms by which exercise and physical activity can interact with the autonomic nervous system and with the brain to improve vascular health as the ultimate outcome. And then finally I'll finish with some future perspectives of the work we're trying to conduct here at the UFRNM. Alright? Yeah, there you go. Okay, close. Are you clicking that? No? Yeah, there you go. So first of all, let's start with some key facts about the cardiovascular disease. So today, across the world, the main cause of deaths, according to the World Health Organization, are the cardiovascular disease. So they're responsible for about 18 million people of deaths in 2019, and they represent about 32% of all global deaths. On top of that, over 70 million of premature deaths, or those deaths before 70 years of age, they occur because of cardiovascular disease, representing 38% of the non-communicable disease. And what is important and what I think we can tackle using exercise and physical activity is that those cardiovascular diseases are prevented by changing risk behavior factors such as physical activity and diet. And that being said, when we think of cardiovascular diseases, we should say that most of those diseases, they actually vessel disease. They occur in the vessel, so they occur in the arteries. So this is one histogram of the natural history of atherosclerosis. So here we have a healthy vessel by the age of 10 years old. But at the end of the adolescence here, by the age of 20 years old, we can check inside the vessel and we're going to be able to see a vessel remodeling. So the vessel has been accommodated by...
You click something. No, do not click.
So it's gone. Loads of troubles.
That's a problem with the
Cable?
E pede para todos lá. Já que sabe que algum ponto poderia ter fecho.
Going back and forth. Now this is off.
Just a second, guys. The projector here just stopped working for unknown reason. Tá desligado?
Now it's going to be on.
Yep. It's coming back to life. Nope. Do I click again? Yeah. Were you able to share? Yeah, it's coming back to life. There you go. With me, things are difficult. Where's the clicker? Then I have the clicker. You also have subtitles on. There you go.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So there's something going on with this clicker here. I click and it doesn't go back and forth the slides.
Try again.
Yeah, there you go. So yeah, as I was telling you guys, the history of atherosclerosis starts during adolescence. So we have the healthy vessel here at childhood, but at the end of adolescence here, by 20 years of age, most of the arteries they're gonna have started the procedures of fatty streaks being inside the vessel wall, right? So then at the end of the adulthood here, this would lead to one of the big main cardiovascular disease events like infarct, stroke, and brain aneurysm. So as you can see, the vessel or the artery is where the problem lies. So all the procedures and all the process of the disease starts to develop inside the vessel wall. So if we look inside one artery here, I have this figure. We have the lumen of the artery, this is where the blood flows, and we have the wall of the artery, and we have the outer layer of the artery. So the procedures of atherosclerosis is going to start affecting, first of all, the arterial function, or how this artery responds to a stimuli, for example, blood flow. And then this would lead to change in arterial structure and how the artery adapts to the stimuli. So the artery will become stiffer and the arterial wall will thicken. And those are the early procedures or early process of atherosclerosis. So there are 4 measurements that I wanted to take all the way before we continue. So the first one is the arterial or the endothelial function. So this is a measurement that we can do to assess how the endothelial layer, the very first one here, in contact with the blood, how the arterial layer or how the endothelial layer responds to the blood flow. So this we call endothelial function. So the procedure here is easy. We measure baseline the blood vessel using a ultrasound here at the brachial artery. Then we occlude this cuff here. There's a cuff here or here. Then we keep the artery closed or the flow. We decrease the flow for about 5 minutes. Then we release the flow. So the flow will increase and the artery will respond to the change in flow. And what we want to see here is an artery that dilates very well to the blood flow. So here we have 4.5 millimeters at rest, and after the release of the cuff, the artery increases in size by 18%. So we have here 18% increase. So this is a good measurement of vascular health, endothelial function. On top of that, we have what we call regional arterial stiffness. This is also a measurement of arterial function, but also considers a bit of arterial structure. So here we have the pulse of the heartbeat at the neck, and the pulse of the heartbeat, the pulse wave, or wave that the blood forms here at the femoral artery. So we take the difference between what is measured here at the carotid artery and what is measured here, and then we have an estimate of the traveling time of the wave inside the vessel. So if the vessel is unhealthy, the wave will travel very fast down the aorta. If the vessel is healthy, the wave will bounce against the wall and it will decrease the time it travels inside the aorta. And this is a measurement of arterial function, also the regional arterial stiffness. And there is another one, what we call local arterial stiffness. So this is how the vessel responds to the blood flow at the local level. So what we normally do, we take an image of the artery. Let's say this is a cross-sectional view of the carotid artery. So here the artery, when the pulse pressure travels inside the artery, it dilates the artery. So we can have the changes in arterial blood pressure and the change in arterial diameter. So if we divide one to the other, we have here a measurement of local arterial stiffness. And this is a measurement of both function and structure, right? And just to end the setup of measurements that we're talking about today, we have here one direct measurement of arterial remodeling. So here in this figure, what you are seeing is a carotid artery. So this is the blood flowing towards the brain here, and we have everything that is in black here is actually the lumen of the artery, and here is the wall of the artery. So if we measure the thickness of this wall here, we have a measurement of arterial remodeling of the vessel. If we think here about the thickening of the arterial wall. We can measure this with ultrasound, and then we have a measurement of how healthy this vessel is. So in an advanced stage of atherosclerosis, what we're going to see is that the lumen starts to block and impede the blood flow, or the healthy blood flow towards the brain in this case, because this is the carotid artery. Or if this is an artery and a heart, we can have the artery and the heart being blocked by by the thickening of the arterial wall. So this is one of the advanced stages of what we call the atherosclerotic process. Yeah, thank you. So all those measurements, they will provide some sort of measurements of how the artery is healthy or unhealthy. So the very first one, the arterial function or the endothelial function, we're going to be assessing the very first stage of atherosclerosis, although indirectly. As soon as we progress, we have the stiffening of the arterial wall, and then the changes in the arterial remodeling. So we think that this is the normal process of atherosclerosis that we can see early in childhood and adolescence. As a matter of fact, if we look at this figure here, we have the age groups of children, adolescents here, all the way to the age of 23. And if we account here on the y-axis, the percentage of participants with lesions inside the arterial wall, and if we consider any sort of the lesions here, type 2, type 3, type 4, type 5, and type 6, at the end of adolescence, we have roughly 70% of participants with at least one kind of lesion on the arterial wall. If we consider here, for example, the more advanced type 5, type 4 lesions of atherosclerosis, at the end of adolescence, around 15% of participants have their arteries committed by some sort of arterial disease here. But we know that we can prevent the development of cardiovascular disease through risk factors or modification of risk factors. So in 2010, it was published by the American Heart Association a set of measurements that combine different risk factors to propose what they called the ideal cardiovascular health. So the ideal cardiovascular health considers 7 metrics: smoking, body mass index, diet, cholesterol, blood pressure, and plasma glucose. They have released in 2020 now another version that considers as well sleep. So they also considering now sleep as the 8th measurement. So they call these measurements the ideal cardiovascular health, and the best scenario is to score an ideal in each of these risk factors. For example, do not smoke, having a good body mass index, a good diet score, although there's a bit of controversy here, good cholesterol levels, blood pressure levels, and glucose level, and now if we sleep well, they also considering an ideal cardiovascular health. So what the literature has been showing then, that I wanted to address today in my talk, is how the presence or not, or how the ideal cardiovascular health improves vessel health. So here we have a paper by the Finnish group in Current Opinion of Lipidology in 2013. They summarize what the research group in Finland was doing about considering risk factors and the ideal cardiovascular health and vessel, arterial function. So they have a very, very strong cohort study there that started in 1978 and it went all the way to 2012. So they followed about 2,000 people until the age of 30 years old, and they collected risk factors when they were young, and they managed to calculate the ideal cardiovascular health in Finnish people and how that is related to arterial remodeling at the age of 30. They're 30 years old. They're not yet developing cardiovascular disease outcomes, but they may have a progressed atherosclerosis in that vessel. So here, to sum up, what they figured out was that some protective factors like the ideal cardiovascular health, they protect the vessel. Eating frequent fruits and vegetables, they protect the vessel. High physical activity protect the vessel. And if you decrease your weight status from overweight to normal weight, they also protect the vessels. And all other risk factors like dyslipidemia, overweight, obesity, blood pressure, smoking, passive smoking, metabolic syndrome, and traditional dietary patterns, they cause the vessel to adapt badly, or it leads to cardiovascular disease. So this is well known in the Finnish population. So my research question that I brought here to Brazil was to investigate how is the Brazilian population then in terms of ideal cardiovascular health and in terms of vessel health. So I went to Pelotas. They have an amazing setup there because they follow people who were born in 1993 all the way up to 2015. So in 2015, those participants, they were 22 years old. And they also had a follow-up conducted when the participants were 18 years old. So my research question was, how is the cardiovascular health of the Brazilian population compared to the literature? And specifically at the end of adolescence. And we know that the end of adolescence is a very important period because at the end of adolescence, 70% of the population will have any sort of lesion in their vessel wall. So what we figured out in Pelotas was measuring those 7 risk factors was that ideal, here we have the number of ideal metrics, 0 to 7. So ideally, you want everybody with 7 ideal metrics, right? So this is the prevalence. Then we have at 18 years old, 22 years old, and A, boys, and B, girls. What we saw that was that we set a cutoff of 4 metrics, 4 ideal metrics. So above 4, we call it ideal cardiovascular health. And below 4, we call it non-ideal cardiovascular health. So this is the prevalence of ideal cardiovascular health. Bear in mind, these kids are 18 years old. So here, boys, at age of 18, they have 85% of the prevalence of an ideal cardiovascular health. But by the age of 22, it increases 20 percentage points. It increases to 61% of ideal cardiovascular health. Just in 4 years of difference between the time points. So in 4 years, it decreased considerably, both for boys and for girls, although girls is slightly higher. But when we look carefully to these data, we see that what happens across the population, the Brazilian population, is different than what we would expect in a European country or in the United States, perhaps. So what we can see here is that the different metrics, physical activity, BMI, diet, and smoking, we're going to talk exclusively here of those ones we can change. Those ones that we call modifiable risk factors, modifiable risk. So from the age of 18 to the age of 22, the way we interpret this data is we have those poorest families and those wealthiest families. So let's see at physical activity at leisure time, for example, it decreases from 18 to 28. And here, higher the better. Higher the better. These are for boys and girls. As you can see, it decreases the amount of ideal physical activity level, mostly among the poor families compared to the rich families. And this is even worse when we look at girls. So girls, they decrease mostly the poorest families, they tend to have a very low prevalence of physical activity, very low prevalence of ideal diet, and BMI is okay for that age, but the poor, they tend to decrease more. So we have clearly here an impact that is different than what maybe we can see in developed countries. Then the question is, all right, so we know that it's changing the ideal cardiovascular health, we know that it's decreasing, and we know that it affects the population differently. So what happens to the vessel wall? So this is a Finnish data. Again, the Finnish articles, they're very common. So here they have 3 different groups. Those people that were low at childhood, they have a low ideal cardiovascular health, and they improved across time. They have here those who were high at childhood, then they decrease across time, and they have here those ones who were always with a low ideal cardiovascular health. So this always bad, bad to good, good to bad. And here the dotted line is the reference group, which is the always healthy. So what we saw here was that compared to the group, always healthy group, there was here an increase in coronary artery calcification. So this is a measurement of atherosclerosis in heart. So here we have the same measurements with the relative risk, and we can see that being always in the low group is very bad for the vessel health. So what happens here in Brazil in 4 years? Bear in mind, this is just 4 years. These participants are 22 years old. So here I took, again, when they were 18 and when they were 15 years old, and I compared what happened to that vessel. And we looked here, the number of metrics, and this is the regional arterial stiffness, the same measurements I introduced earlier. So as you can see, as you increase the number of ideal metrics, the beta value here is negative. This means that the vessel is becoming healthier. So decreasing the beta coefficient means that the relationship is negative. So we have a negative association between the stiffness of the wall and the number of metrics. What was new about this article is that we wanted to know what may be behind this association, right? So we aimed at the time to look at inflammatory markers. So we had 2 inflammatory markers here. We have EL6 and we have CRP. Both for boys here and for girls down here. So this was collected when they were 22 years old. So what we saw was that there is an effect here that we call total effect of the metric, of the ideal cardiovascular metric on the vessel health. So higher the metric, lower the stiffness, and this is good. And it's the same for male, and it's the same for female. But when we considered the impact of the inflammatory markers, we see that the inflammatory markers, they do not mediate this association. So the ideal cardiovascular health is affecting the health of the vessel without the impact of these 2 inflammatory markers. Bear in mind though that we only worked with 2 inflammatory markers, so there may be others in the casual path, but considering IL-6 and CRP, those inflammatory markers, they're not in the causal path of the exposure to risk and the healthy or the health of the vessel. So this set of words that I presented was our contribution here in Brazil to the impact of traditional cardiovascular risk factors to the vessel, to the health of the arterial wall. And this adds to the literature that was published previously, mostly in European countries, mostly in Finland, and mostly in few articles from the US and few articles from other places in the world. But clearly, this is a global phenomenon. It also impacts Brazil. What is new here is that the differences between the different wealth quintiles, right, between the poorest and the wealthiest, it's very likely that the poorest people, they are going to be suffering more of these decreases in arterial health compared to the richest ones, mostly because of modifiable risk factors. And then what we covered so far is that cardiovascular disease, they start in young children. By the age of 20, mostly 70% of the population are going to present any sort of arterial lesion. And these lesions, they're going to lead to atherosclerosis in the future. And we see that the clustering of risk factors in adolescents leads to impaired vessel health. This at the age of 22, right? And it seems that inflammatory markers do not mediate the observed impairment of arterial stiffness in early adulthood. Maybe as the age progresses, adulthood, it can be a problem, it can be in the casual path, but we don't know that. Okay? So, now I'm going to move on how to prevent them. And then this is when I start talking about possible mechanisms and the work I completed, trying to understand how the brain and the vessel can communicate to serve as a preventative strategy of early arterial impairment. All right? I will focus on work on children and adolescents because I think most of the preventative strategy is going to have a better outcome if we start early in childhood. But I also will talk about work conducted with older adults as well. All right. So it's not new that physical activity is beneficial to overall cardiovascular health. We know that. That is since 2006. This I think was the very first article in Lancet with children specifically. So here we have about 1,700 children from 9 to 15 years old, and here we have physical activity levels. So as you can see, as we increase the physical activity levels here, we decrease the presence of cardiovascular disease risk factors. So the whole idea is, in order to prevent cardiovascular disease in the future, I exercise, I practice physical activity as a child, as an adolescent, and this would decrease the cardiovascular disease risk factors, and this would decrease the likelihood of cardiovascular disease, right? But there is a problem with that thinking, and the problem being this. The cardiovascular risk factors, they do not account for the benefits of physical activity entirely. What I mean is, if I do physical activity, if I practice physical activity, or if I exercise regularly, I have a small effect on risk factors. But the size of the effect on the cardiovascular disease is much bigger than that accounted decreases in cardiovascular disease risk factors. So this paper by Mora in 2007, so she looked at the reduction of cardiovascular disease events, deaths. And then if you account for the benefits, right? So this is reduction in events, so this is good. So if you account for the reduction in events caused by all the traditional risk factors, even some new risk factors here, there is only 60% of causal link. So you decrease risk factor and only 60% of the explanation is there. So there's 40% of explanation that exercise, physical activity changed and we do not know. Or we have a clue of what it is, but it is not the risk factors. So in 2009, Joyner and Green, they argued that the benefits of exercise and physical activity, they occur in the vessel. So the vessel is a very important target of exercise and physical activity. In addition to the vessel, the autonomic nervous system. So if you live in a very stressful situation with a heightened activity of the sympathetic nervous system, it's very likely that you're going to develop cardiovascular disease. And this is what the literature shows. So there are few meta-analyses showing that few markers of autonomic function, they're linked with cardiovascular disease. So the whole idea is here, how does exercise change the function of the artery and the function of the autonomic nervous system? And specifically, is this effect observable in children and adolescents? So this is the first study I conducted. Bear in mind, this is a very small sample size of 22 girls and a total of 53 adolescents. Bear in mind, these are very active adolescents as well, so it's not very representative of the population. But here we measure different things here. We measure heart rate variability as an indicator of autonomic function. as we measure blood sample here to assess what we call traditional risk factors, blood lipids, blood glucose. We also measure blood pressure. And then we measured physical fitness and heart rate recovery, which is also a measurement of autonomic function. So here I have two measurements of autonomic function, or how the brain is controlling their bodies, right? So what we saw here, first of all, I will ask you to keep your attention on those numbers here. So if the number is negative, it's good. More physical activity leads to a better cardiovascular profile. So here I have the traditional cardiovascular hit risk, I have the autonomic risk, and I have a combination of both, right? So moderate physical activity, vigorous physical activity, and a measurement of physical fitness. So physical fitness did not show any association. So let's focus on physical activity. So as we can see here, physical activity, vigorous physical activity has no association with traditional risk, but it has a strong association with the autonomic function and with a sum of the two. And moderate physical activity, it has association with the training part. But what is new here, what I really want to draw your attention to, is that when we consider autonomic function above the traditional risk factors, we increase the strength of the association. So it jumps from a 17 R squared to a 32% explanation when we combine the autonomic. So it seems that in children and adolescents, one of the ways physical activity improves that cardiovascular health is via an improved autonomic function, which corroborates with the literature proposed by Green and Joyner. Specifically speaking about vigorous physical activity, we see that the strength of the association is much higher when you consider autonomic function. It's not even there when you just consider the traditional risk factors. So it seems that physical activity improves cardiovascular health of adolescents via mainly the vigorous physical activity, the autonomic function. Alright? So when we look at recovery of the heart rate variability, so this number here, higher the better, we check that those children performing more vigorous physical activity here, they recover faster. This effect is not shown on moderate physical activity and is not shown on physical fitness either. Alright? So what we can see here is that vigorous physical activity improves autonomic function and moderate improves both. So the take home message here is from this article is physical activity is associated with autonomic function. Early in life with my data and also in adults with previous literature, the association between physical activity and autonomic function is stronger compared to traditional risk factors. Physical activity intensity appears to be key, mainly in adolescents for this outcome specifically. And then we moved on to investigate the talk between the autonomic nervous system and the vessel function. So the whole idea here is the vessel function is able to communicate with the brain via the autonomic function. And the brain will adapt to what the artery is telling the brain. So for example here, we have this is an image of the baroreflex control of blood pressure. So first of all, we have the baroreceptors and the carotids, and they communicate to the brain how the vessel responds to blood flow. If the artery is not healthy, this system is going to be blocked. So if the artery is healthy, this system will work. It will work better, right? So here we have the baroreceptor telling the brain how blood pressure is changing in the arterial wall. The brain will then modulate the heart rate and also modulate the arterial response to blood flow, right? So the research question here is how exercise, or if exercise is improving any of these link between the vessel and the brain. So here we have the first study that was completed we try to understand how this is changing acutely, how exercise changes the system in an acute form. So what we saw was, here is an image of the carotid artery. I showed you this one earlier. So we have the blood pressure, and we have the ECG trace, and this is blood pressure, sorry. And then what we measured was the vessel function, how it changes when the flow passes by. So a very healthy artery will bounce more, will dilate more. A very rigid, stiff artery will bounce less. And if it bounces less, it tells the brain, not the whole story. It doesn't tell the brain properly what is the blood pressure. So the brain cannot adjust. So in the long run, a person may develop higher blood pressure, for example. So we wanted to know what happens after exercise. So we have three conditions here: high intensity, moderate intensity, and control. So high intensity, 8 bouts of 1 minute at 90% of maximum aerobic speed. And moderate intensity, same design, but 90% of gas exchange threshold, which is a measurement of moderate intensity. And then control situation, participants did not perform anything. So we have here before the exercise, immediately after, and 1 hour later. So what we showed was, first of all, blood pressure. Blood pressure goes down across time, so blood pressure decreases. What this means is if the blood pressure decreases, it's going to change the arterial response to flow, right? Remember, change in dilation by change in pressure. And here, the blood pressure decreased, following high intensity and also following moderate, but also 1 hour later, it was low for high intensity. But what happens then with the baroreflex gain? What happens to the control, how the brain controls the blood pressure? So it decreases following exercise. Why does it decrease? Because the vessel is struggling to tell the brain how things are happening. And then it comes back earlier, 1 hour later. Right? So this is the overall gain. This is what we call baroreflex gain. But when we divided this into 2 branches, the vessel and the autonomic function, how is this working? So here we have the autonomic version up here, and here we have the vessel. So as you can see, the vessel, the blood pressure goes down, the vessel dilates more. So we have an improved vessel function following exercise. But this improved vessel function does not translate into an improved autonomic function. So immediately following exercise, it seems that the vessel is receiving the benefits of the exercise powers, but the autonomic function is struggling to adjust the blood pressure. And this is a very good acute response to exercise, because we want to see that. Right? So we see here an improved vessel function despite a 20% decrease in pulse pressure following both exercise intensities. Right? So then we moved on. We wanted to know, all right, so we know what happens after exercise acutely. What happens if we train these children? What happens if they perform exercise in a frequent way? So for this study, we had 2 groups, a control group and a training group. The control group did not exercise, the training group performed 12 sessions, 4 weeks, 3 times per week of high intensity exercise. Right? We wanted to know, does this change in baroreflex, or those that we see acutely after exercise, does it lead to an improved vascular health across time? And what happens to the autonomic response to a healthier vessel? Does it change the whole system? So then we moved on to conclude this exercise training. We have 12 sessions, and the intensity was the same relative intensity, but the load was improving across the session. So we planned a very good training routine for these adolescents. What we saw was it did not change. It did not change the autonomic function measured using the baroreflex. Bear in mind that this is the autonomic response to the vessel, right? Again, we measured here how the autonomic system responds to the vessel. So the vessel tells the brain and the brain responds. So it did not change. But it also did not change how the vessel works. So the carotid artery did not change following training. Our explanation, or a possible explanation for this, is that these are very healthy children, very healthy adolescents already. So that vessel health was maybe at an optimum value. So this is the main indication of this work, and maybe future investigations, you guys here within UFRN, if you want to do this, we can try and look at the population or at an exercise intervention and investigate whether here in a diverse population, increasing that physical activity levels or training these adolescents will improve their autonomic or arterial function, right? And then we did the same study, but now we don't want to, the question here is, we do not want to know whether the vessel is talking to the brain properly and whether the brain is answering to the vessel accordingly. What we want to know here is what happens to vessel health or endothelial function. So the very first measurement I spoke at the beginning, we investigate after the 4 weeks of training as well. So what we saw was, even in healthy adolescents, there was an improvement in the endothelial function. So that vessel, that artery, that brachial artery, was responding better to blood flow following 4 weeks of training. And this was decreased following the training. So after 2 weeks of a sedentary imposed condition, the vessel decreased its function again. So the take-home message of this figure is to keep as active as possible. And obviously here we also measured a set of traditional risk factors and we did not see any improvement. So that theory a while ago that I mentioned, it seems like that exercise is changing something that is not the risk factors. We could corroborate that hypothesis by showing that we can improve endothelial function. We show no improvement in vessel structure here, arterial stiffness, but we could see improvements in arterial function. And this improvement was seen in very active, very healthy adolescents. All right. We did not see any improvement in microvascular function. So it seems like that the bigger vessels, like the vessels carrying the blood in the periphery, are the ones responsible to training, but not arterial stiffness and not microvascular function. All right. So summary so far: combination of autonomic and vascular health is perhaps what is surrounding the benefits of physical activity and the benefits of exercise training, mostly high-intensity exercise training. And for adolescents, this is a very nice discussion that the literature, most of the literature is focused on adult health. And for adults, there is this discussion of the effect of the intensity, whether the intensity will lead to adherence and all that, which I think is great, but we're missing a very specific population in that discussion, which is adolescents. So for adolescents, it seems that exercise intensity is a key factor. It's a key factor. So promoting the intensity of the activity seems important, right? Training studies showed improvements in vascular function, but less improvement in vessel stiffness. Again, few limitations: sample size, characteristics of the participants. This is a very limited study for a very specific population. It doesn't apply for a larger setting or a diverse population. So we still need more studies to tease apart the effects of exercise on the autonomic function, on the vessel function, and how we can promote a better cardiovascular health profile. And just to finish off, some perspectives here I have, the work I conducted here. So this is one collaboration that I had with Eduardo here. This is a master dissertation that I was the supervisor. So here we have four groups of older adults. We have the zero line here, those older adults with preserved vascular function and preserved cardiovascular stiffness. And then we have those older adults with impaired structure, only structure, function, okay? This one, impaired function, but not structure. And structure here is arterial stiffness. And here we have those older adults with both function and structure. And here, the fitness, the amount of, or the distance the older adults are able to cover. And on the right-hand side here, we have the physical activity, moderate and vigorous, right? So what we saw was the fitness or the physical function of the older adults is associated with the worsening of the vascular profile, right? So those adults with both function and structure impaired, they covered a less distance in the test, right? This is controlled for ill confounders. But we did not see that for physical activity. I think there's a problem with the way we measure physical activity here with the accelerometer. So some of the cut points and all that limitation that comes together with some decisions. Maybe it's clouding the way we interpret this data. So we had to log transform this, and then even all, it doesn't change. So it doesn't change the vessel function in older adults, but function, physical fitness does. Bear in mind as well, this is a very small sample size, about 100 older adults. And then to finish, there's this problem with obesity, and in childhood obesity, we can also see this happening. It leads to endothelial dysfunction and increases arterial stiffness. Endothelial dysfunction, the very first step in a cascade of events, and it changes blood pressure control, increases cardiac workload, leads to hypertrophy, increases ventricular stiffness, and leads to cardiac dysfunction, as well as dysfunction of the vessel and dysfunction of the endothelium. So what we want to know here now in our future investigations is how exercise can change all this chain of events early in childhood. Okay? And then these are some potential mediators and potential mechanisms behind this effect of obesity on vascular function. Sleep problems, psychological factors, hypertension, traditional blood pressure, traditional cardiovascular risk factors here, resident, inflammation, and obviously fitness and physical activity. All right. So perspectives: how to improve vascular health. I want to look at also not only the vessel in the arms and legs, the peripheral blood vessels, but also the central, the vessels in the brain. The difference between structure and function, if we can preserve or improve one or another, how do we tease this apart? A diverse population, this is something that we need to conduct more studies in a diverse population. And obviously considering how the brain also responds to exercise and training. Right, so some conclusions of my talk today. Thanks a lot, guys. Thanks, Daniel. Thank you, everybody, for listening. So at the population level, evidence shows that CBD impairs vascular health. Prevention through physical activity is key, and early in adolescence and childhood, intensity of the activity seems to be important. Mostly because of improvements in vascular function, even in healthy adolescents. We need to expand that type of work in a diverse population. And there are loads of questions still there to be completed. The effects of stressful situations. I've been chatting with Ed recently, how stressful events impair vascular function and how physical activity can modulate that. And the impact of training, the impact of exposure to risk factors, and a lot of research questions. So thank you guys for listening. I do appreciate your time, and thank you, Daniel. Thank you guys, and that's it.
Okay, we have time for questions. Who have some question for Professor Ricardo? Professor Franco, Jill, Jake is gone. If anyone has any question, here as well. Let me see if I can.
I have one question, so if you can hear me.
Go ahead.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, yes, we can hear you.
Okay. You mentioned that it maybe exercise intensity might be one of the most important factors, and that maybe a higher intensity could lead to greater benefits. How relevant, I mean, if you had to compare exercise intensity to baseline diameter, and so could it be possible, if we wanted to look at precision medicine, how practical would it be to actually see how any type of exercise intensity impacted shear stress on someone's baseline diameter, and then we could have an equation that could determine an exercise intensity. So some people, they could probably do lower exercise intensity, but they would have a greater shear stress just because of their smaller baseline diameter. And that would be just as effective as someone who did a higher intensity at an absolute, measure. So I just didn't know kind of your thoughts on that, and whether we should prescribe higher intensity for everybody, or we should kind of maybe, if we have the opportunity to look at what their baseline diameter is, and then potentially prescribe exercise based on the impact of the different shear stress at various intensities.
Right. Thank you, Franco. This is a very interesting question. So what we did in those training studies, that when we looked at either the carotid artery, right, or the brachial artery, the ones we aimed, they did not change that diameter, baseline diameter, with training. So I think mostly the carotid did not change the training. And then when we did the FMD analysis, we corrected for shear stress as well. So we have this allometric scaling of the shear stress, and that did not change any of the outcomes. But you're right. I think though the main problem with the training study is that we only had the high intensity training, and we did not have enough power or enough sample size to tease apart the impact of different baseline arterial measurements, or before training arterial diameter, neither at the brachial artery nor at the carotid artery. But what the literature seems to be showing is that the pattern of the shear stress during the exercise stimuli is very important for improvements in vascular function. And you're absolutely right on that question, because if the artery has a different diameter before intervention, the shear stress that is going to occur during the intervention may be different based on the exercise intensity, and also on the exercise mode, whether this is intermittent or is continuous, will change also the shear stress and the pattern of the vessel adaptive response. But this is just my theory, I can tell you, because I don't think data has shown, at least in children and adolescents, different phenotypes of vessel at baseline, and how those phenotypes would respond to different exercise intensity. That is something that we absolutely don't know.
Just one follow-up question. Do you think that if your exercise training had been longer, do you think that you would have seen those changes that you had, that you didn't see within your study?
Yeah, that's a very good one. I actually struggle with the reviewers there. So the reviewers asked the same questions, because the papers we based are rational. They were normally longer, 4 months. There is a very interesting investigation with adults. I think the main author is Monahan. And they showed that 4 months of exercise training improved the vascular vessel side of the equation, but not the autonomic side. And that was the main article we based our intervention on. And my answer to you is yes. I think if the training was longer, we could have seen a improvement in vessel function. But I think the main problem there was the fitness levels of those children. They were very fit. So it's a very, very biased sample size we had there. So So those students, they liked exercise. So we went to school, we would say, oh, who wants here to take part in a training scheme of 4 weeks? We wanted to have girls involved, but girls did not show up. So we only had boys, and it was a very high fitness level sort of sample. So my answer to that is, I think in theory, if we increase the duration of the training, and if we had like a more diverse group of adolescents, I think we would see improvements in the vessel function, less in the autonomic side of the equation. That was our working theory. But obviously the data did not show that, but some caveats there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your presentation.
Thank you.
Any more questions from here, or Jill, or even Professor Franco, if any other question arise? Nobody? I have a question that might be crazy, but I mean, I was trying to make sure everything was working, so I have missed some points. And by the way, my apologies for that. We had a lot of troubles here. Is it possible to create a cutoff point for like vascular function or autonomic function, and to include that as a metric in the ideal cardiovascular health?
Yeah, that's a very good question there. So when we completed the work here with the older adults, one of the main problems we had was to define what is a preserved vascular function and what is a impaired vascular health, right? So what we did, we used population normative values, right? And then what the literature shows is that above some predefined values, population or normative values, you increase the risk of CVD. So this is what we use as a standard approach. But obviously we don't have that for every outcome. So we have that very clear for arterial stiffness. So above 10 to 12 meters per second of the wave flow inside the vessel, it increases considerably the likelihood of a cardiovascular event. We have that as well for the thickness of the intima media of the carotid, above a 1 millimeter thickness, and each increment above that value, it also increases the likelihood of a cardiovascular event. But the intima media thickness of the carotid is mostly based on older adult populations of the United States, so that's not very specific to Brazilian standards. But when it comes down to vascular function, I'm not aware of a study or a systematic review that shows that above certain value the vessel will lead to cardiovascular disease, or we should prevent the vessel to achieve that dysfunction. So what we normally do is pre and post and check people who improved or not. But that's a very important question. And also, even the thickening of the INT, I'm not sure how we can reverse that in terms of like if it's thickened due to cardiovascular risk already. How can we decrease that? I'm not sure. But yeah, the answer to that question is there are certain values out there, but they're just a guess, I guess. Just like some numbers at the end of the day.
Anyone? I still have one more question. It's a follow-up question, actually. And what about the autonomic function? What measure specifically did you use? Because most during the presentation you use like autonomic function, and how both measures could be implemented, because some risk factors are like directly measurable, others are just self-reported, and I mean, of course, it increases the complexity of an assessment for defining the level of ideal cardiovascular health in terms of the metrics. So my question is, which measure did you use for autonomic function, and how could both autonomic function and vascular health could be implemented into the ideal cardiovascular health metrics?
Cool. Again, very good question there. Thank you. There are two approaches that we use to assess vascular function, autonomic function, sorry. The first one is measuring heart rate variability, specifically speaking, the RMSSD, right? Because it's a measurement that has been validated against some blockades, pharmacological assessments, and we're pretty much sure that that reflects the parasympathetic system, and that's it. We have no assessment of the sympathetic activity, and that is very tricky to complete in humans, mostly in adolescents. So we have a good measurement of parasympathetic function, and mostly after exercise. Following exercise, the heart rate decreases, and the decrease of the heart rate is because of parasympathetic function. But there is a bit of sympathetic withdrawal there after exercise, but it's difficult to measure. So the first approach is to measure RMSSD, heart rate variability. The second one is to measure how the heart rate responds to change in blood pressure. So that is baroreflex sensitivity. And that's, again, because we look at the heart, we can only infer parasympathetic function. But the idea is, if you perturb blood pressure, how does the heart respond? And obviously, the way the heart responds is because of the brain telling it to slow down or to speed up. So those are the two assessments. The first, RMSSD, and the second is a frequency analysis of the variations in blood pressure and how the variation in blood pressure alters the variation in heart rates. And this is an estimation of the parasympathetic branch of the baroreflex activity. And that is the main problem with that sort of measurement. It's pretty difficult to have a standard population of values. There is like few work with children and adolescents showing some normative values and which is okay, but the outcome there, normative for what? Right? Is it for good health? Is it to decrease, or is it related to the ideal cardiovascular health? The answer is no, it's not. It's just a normative value of the population. So the percentile, 50 percentile should have this value, the 75th percentile should have that value, but it doesn't relate this to any outcome or to any measurement of ideal cardiovascular health. As you can see, there's plenty to work on there to establish what are the values, how does the ideal cardiovascular health change blood vessel and autonomic function. Those I don't have an answer for that.
That's great. After I asked, I actually thought about some options on how to implement. And now we have like Polar 810 that you can attach to your chest and measure using your cell phone as a recording device. And also there are some apps with camera-based measurements with some kind of validation that could make it easier, like for measurements in larger samples. But I don't know, just some thoughts from a researcher outside your field.
There's some lab manipulations as well that you can do. You can ask a person to put her hands inside a bucket with ice, and that is a huge stimuli for the sympathetic effect. So you can measure heart rates, you can measure blood pressure, but that is very painful. It works in a very specific setting, so I wouldn't touch that. But you're right. At the population level, more applicable research is difficult.
Last time, anyone, any more questions? If not, I appreciate all the guys from Virginia for taking your time to attend to this extra seminar, as well as Professor Ricardo for participating. It was awesome. And yeah, that's it. Thank you very much, guys, and hopefully to see you in a future opportunity.
Right. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.